Chapter 6 The Sunset of Mankind. When I came out of the great hall, I came out into the calm of the evening. The scene was lit by the warm glow of the setting sun. At first, things were very confusing. Everything was so different from the world which I had known, even the flowers. The big building which I had left was on the slope of a broad river valley. But the river Thames had moved about a mile from its present position. I decided to climb up to the top of a hill about a mile and a half away. As I walked, I looked out for anything which would explain the ruinous condition in which I found the world. It was indeed ruinous. A little way up the hill there was a great heap of stone bound together with metal, walls fallen into decay, and stones lying in heaps, with wild plants growing up among them. It was clearly the remains of some huge building, whose use and purpose I could not guess. As I looked around, I realized that there were no small houses to be seen. It seemed that the single house lived in by one family had ceased to exist. I could see here and there buildings which looked like palaces, but the small house and the cottage had disappeared. Then another thought came to me. I looked at the 6 little people who were following me. I saw that all had the same sort of garment, the same soft hairless faces, and the same girlish roundness of their limbs. It may seem strange to you that I had not noticed this before, but everything was so strange. In dress, skin, behavior, in all those differences which now mark off the sexes, male and female, from each other. These people of the future were alike, and the children looked like little men and women, smaller, but in every other way just like their parents. I guess that the children of that time were very forward in development of body in other ways. I found afterwards plenty of proof of this. These people were living in great ease and safety, so one would expect that in such circumstances the sexes would be very much alike. The strength of the man, the unity of the family, different work for men and for women. These things are necessities in an age of force and war. But when the people in a country are sufficient, and there is no danger of their being killed off or dying out, then much childbearing becomes an evil rather than a blessing. Where there is no danger of war and children are safe, there is less necessity for a strong family, and the woman need no longer be specially given over to the care of children. We see some beginnings of this even in our own times. In the future age it was complete. I must remind you that this is what I thought at the time. Later, I discovered how very far away these thoughts were from the reality. While I was thinking about these things, my attention was drawn by a pretty little building, like a well under a small dome. It is odd that wells should still exist, I thought, and went on considering other things. There were no large buildings towards the top of the hill. My walking powers clearly seemed wonderful to the little people, so I was soon left alone. With a feeling of freedom and adventure, I pushed on towards the top. There I found a seat made of some yellow metal. It was half covered with soft moss. I sat down and looked at the broad view of our old world under the sunset of that long day. It was as sweet and fair a view as I have ever seen. The sun had already gone below the horizon. The west was flaming gold touched with bars of purple and blood red. Below me was the valley of the Thames, in which the river lay like a band of polished steel. I have already spoken of the great palaces dotted about among the trees, some in ruins, some still occupied. Here and there rose a white or silvery form in the vast garden of the earth. Here and there I saw the straight slope of a roof or the curve of a dome. There were no separate fields, no fences. There was no sign of separate ownership, no marks of farming. The whole earth had become a garden. As I sat there, I began to form my explanation of the things which I had seen. Afterwards, I found that I had got only a half-truth, only a glance at one side of the truth. That red sunset started me thinking of the sunset of mankind. It seemed to me that I had come by chance upon mankind in a state of decay. For the first time, I began to realize an odd result of the efforts at the social improvement in which we are at present engaged. They produce weakness. This is their natural result. Strength is produced by the need for strength. Safety is a help and encouragement to the feeble. Civilization makes the conditions of life better. It makes life itself safer. This work of civilization had gone on and on until it reached its highest point. One victory over nature followed another. Things which are now dreams became plans, and these plans became realities. And the harvest was what I saw. The preservation of health and the scientific use of the land in the farming are today only in their beginnings. The science of our time has attacked only a small part of the field of human disease, yet its work spreads slowly and steadily. On our farms and gardens, we destroy a weed here and there. We grow some 20 useful plants, and we lead a greater number to fight it out and live or die. We improve our favorite plants and animals gradually by breeding only from the best of them. But how few of these favorite plants and animals are! We produce a new and better apple, a seedless orange, a sweeter and larger flower, a more convenient breed of cow. We improve them gradually, because our aims are not clear and our knowledge is small, and nature works slowly in our unskilled hands. Someday all this will be better and better arranged. The whole world will be intelligent, educated, working together. Things will move faster and faster towards the final victory over nature. In the end, wisely and carefully, we shall make animal and vegetable life work perfectly together to serve human needs. All this work must have been done, well done, during those years over which my machine had jumped. The air was free from poisonous insects. The earth was free from weeds. Everywhere there were fruits and delightful flowers. All disease had been driven out. I saw no signs of contagious catching disease during all my stay. Even the processes of decay had been greatly affected by these changes. There had been, too, great social improvements. I saw men living in splendid buildings to shelter them. I found them wonderfully clothed, and until now I had found them engaged in no sort of labor. There were no signs of struggle, neither struggle for wealth nor struggle for social position and honor. The shop advertisements trade all that business which is so important in our world, all was gone. It was natural that on that golden evening I should jump at the idea of a social heaven upon earth. In former times, the difficulty always was the increasing population. This difficulty had been met. The population had ceased to increase. This change in conditions had, of course, produced other changes. What is the cause of human intelligence and energy? They are caused by conditions in which the active, the strong, and clever live and the weaker die. They are caused by conditions which demand the loyal working together of intelligent men, which demand self-control and patience and decision. From the great dangers to the young in those former times, there arose the family, the man's fierce possessiveness of the wife, the tenderness for the young, the parents' self-sacrifice. Now there were no dangers. The young were in no danger. There is always a growing disapproval of the possessiveness of the husband, of the fierceness of motherhood, of strong feelings of all kinds. Strong feelings are unnecessary. They make us uncomfortable. They are out of tune with a pleasant civilized life. I thought of the small, weak bodies of the people, their lack of intelligence, and of those many great ruined buildings. This threatened my belief in a perfect conquest of nature. After the battle, there was quiet. Man was strong, energetic, intelligent, and used his energy to change the conditions of his life. He made for himself a world of perfect comfort and perfect safety. Under the new conditions of perfect comfort and perfect safety, that restless energy, which with us now is strength, became a weakness. Even in our time, certain desires which were once necessary for life are causes of failure. Bodily courage and love of battle are no help, and may even do harm to a civilized man. For many years there had been no danger of war or attack, no danger from wild beasts, no diseases to need strength of body to fight them, no need of hard labor. For such a life the weak are as well suited as the strong. Indeed, the weak are no longer weak. They are better suited to such conditions, because the strong are restless and driven by an energy for which there is no outlet. Those beautiful buildings were the last outburst of the now purposeless energy of man, before he settled down to work in unity with the new conditions. They were his cry of victory before he began the last great peace. This has always been the fate of energy in security. Men use their energy in art or in law, and then, in the end, come idleness and decay. In the piece of time which I saw, this feeling for art had almost died away. To adorn themselves with flowers, to dance, to sing in the sunlight. In the end, even that would fade into. That was all that remained of the artistic spirits. In the end, even that would fade into contented inactivity. As a knife is sharpened on a stone, so pain and necessity keep men keen. But here, that hateful stone was broken at last. As I stood there in the gathering dark, I thought that in this simple explanation I had understood the whole secret of these charming people. Perhaps their check on the increase of population had succeeded too well, and their numbers had not remained the same but had become less. That would explain the empty ruins. My explanation was very simple and seemed very believable, but it was wrong. Chapter 7. Loss of the Time Machine. As I stood there, the full moon came up, and its silver light flowed out over the world. The bright little figures ceased to move about below me. It was cold. I decided to go down and find where I could sleep. I looked for the building which I knew. Then my eye passed on to the figure of the white sphinx. It became more and more distinct as the light of the rising moon grew brighter. The bushes round it were black in the pale light. In front of it there was a little lawn. I looked at the lawn again. A strange doubt came to me. No, I said bravely to myself, that was not the lawn. But it was the lawn. The white face of the Sphinx was towards it. The time machine had gone. Can you imagine what I felt when I saw that this was indeed true? The time machine had gone. I might be left helpless in this strange new world with no hope of return. The thought seemed to seize me by the throat and stop my breathing. In another moment, I was running madly down the slope. Once I fell head first and cut my face. I did not wait to stop the bleeding, but jumped up and ran on with the warm blood running down my cheek and chin. All the time as I ran, I was saying to myself, they have moved it a little, they have pushed it under the bushes out of the way. Yet I knew that was foolishness. I knew that the machine had been taken away out of my reach. My breath came with pain. I suppose I covered the whole distance from the top of the hill to the little lawn, about 2 miles, in 10 minutes. And I was not a young man. I cursed aloud at my confident folly in leaving the machine. It was a waste of breath. I cried aloud. No one answered. Not a creature seemed to be moving in the moonlit world. When I reached the lawn, my worst fears were realized. There was not a trace of the machine to be seen. I felt faint and cold as I looked at the empty space among the bushes. I ran round the place as if the thing might be hidden in a corner. Then I stopped, suddenly with my hand seizing my hair. The Sphinx towered above me on its bronze base, white in the light of the rising moon. It seemed to smile, mocking at my helpless despair. I might have comforted myself by imagining that the little people had put the machine in some shelter for me, but I was quite sure that they had neither the intelligence nor the strength to do so. That was what frightened me. I felt that there was some power whose existence I had not so far suspected, and it had caused my time machine to disappear. And yet, I felt sure of one thing. It could not have moved in time. I had taken the starting handles off the machine. No one could possibly start it without them. The machine had moved only in space. It was hidden somewhere. Where could it be? I think I must have had a short attack of madness. I remember running in and out among the moonlit bushes. Some white animal jumped up, frightened in the dim light. Something like a deer. I remember beating the bushes with my hands so that they bled. Then, crying aloud in my misery, I ran down to the great stone building. The big hall was dark, silent and deserted. I slipped on the uneven floor and fell over one of the stone tables. I lit a match and went past the dusty curtains. There I found a second great hall covered with cushions, upon which 20 or 30 of the little people were sleeping. I think they must have found this appearance of mine very strange, for I came suddenly out of the quiet darkness, making wordless noises and lighting a match. They had forgotten about matches. "Where is my time machine?" I shouted like an angry child. I seized some of them and shook them. It must have seemed very strange. Some of them laughed. Most of them looked very frightened. When I saw them standing around me, I realized that I was behaving very foolishly and only making them afraid of me. I threw down the match and, knocking over one of the people in my clothes, I ran across the big dining hall again and out under the moonlight. I heard cries of terror and their little feet running this way and that. I do not remember all that I did as the moon came slowly up into the sky. I suppose it was the unexpected nature of my loss which maddened me. I felt hopelessly cut off from the people of my own kind. I was a strange animal in a strange world. I ran to and fro screaming and crying upon God. I felt among the moonlit ruins, touching strange creatures in the black shadows. In the end, I lay on the ground near the Sphinx and wept in absolute misery. Then I slept. When I woke, it was full day and two little birds were hopping round me on the grass within reach of my arm. I sat up in the freshness of the morning, trying to remember how I had got there and why I had such a feeling of loss and despair. Then things came clear in my mind. With the plain, reasonable daylight, I could look my circumstances fairly in the face. I saw the wild folly of my mad behavior last night, and I could reason with myself. Suppose the worst, I said. Suppose the machine is altogether lost, perhaps destroyed. I must be calm, and I must learn the ways of the people. Must find out how the time machine had been lost, stolen, or taken away, and also find some means of getting materials and tools, so that in the end, perhaps, I may make another time machine. That would be my only hope. A poor hope, perhaps, but better than despair. And after all, it is a beautiful and curious world. But probably the machine had only been taken away. Still, I must be calm and patient, find its hiding place, and recover it by force or by some trick. I stood up and looked about me, wondering where I could bathe. I felt very stiff and dirty. The freshness of the morning made me desire an equal freshness. My emotion was finished. Indeed, as I went about my business, I found myself wondering at my excitement last night. I made a careful examination of the ground about the little lawn. I wasted some time in useless questionings of such of the little people as came by. They all failed to understand me. Some were simply dull, some thought it was a joke and laughed at me. I had the hardest task in the world to keep my hands off their pretty laughing faces. The grass gave better advice. I found a long mark in it, about midway between the base of the Sphinx and the marks of my feet where on my arrival I struggled with the overturned machine. There were other signs of removal, and I saw some strange narrow footprints like those I could imagine made by a sloth. This long mark directed my closer attention to the base of the Sphinx. It was, as I think I have said, of bronze. It was not a mere block, but highly decorated with deep-framed side pieces. I went and tapped these. The base was hollow. Examining the sides with care, I found they were not all one piece with the frames. There were no handles or keyholes. Possibly the sides, if there were doors, as I supposed, opened from within. One thing was clear enough to my mind. It took no very great effort of thought to guess that my time machine was inside the base. But how it got there was a different problem. I saw the heads of two little people, dressed in orange garments, coming under some blossom-covered apple trees towards me. I turned smiling to them and made signs for them to come to me. They came. Then, pointing to the bronze base, I tried to show my wish to open it. But at my first movement towards this, they behaved very strangely. I don't know how to describe their expression to you. Suppose you were to make a very loose sign to a delicate-minded woman, it is how she would look. They went off as if they had received the last possible insult. I next tried a sweet-looking little fellow in whites with exactly the same result. Somehow his manner made me feel ashamed of myself. But, as you know, I wanted the time machine, and I tried him once more. As he turned off like the others, I became angry. In 3 steps I cuffed him. I had him by the loose part of his garments round the neck and began dragging him towards the Sphinx. Then I saw the horror of his face, and all of a sudden I let him go. But I was not beaten yet. I hit the bronze place as hard as I could with my hands. I thought I heard something move inside. To be exact, I thought I heard a sound like a laugh. But I must have been mistaken. Then I got a big stone from the river, and came and hammered till I had flattened a circle in the decorations, and the rust came off in a powdery shower. The delicate little people must have heard me hammering a mile away on either hand. I saw a crowd of them upon the slopes, looking secretly at me. At last, hot and tired, I sat down to watch the place. But I was too restless to watch long. I could work at a problem for years, but to wait inactive for 24 hours? That is another matter. I got up after a time and began walking aimlessly through the bushes towards the hill again. "Patience!" said I to myself. "If you want your machine again, you must leave that Sphinx alone. If they mean to take your machine away, it's little good that you're breaking those doors. And if they don't, you will get it back as soon as you can ask for it. Face this world, learn its ways, watch it, be careful of too hasty guesses at its meaning. In the end, you will find the meaning of it all." Then suddenly, I thought of the years I had spent in study and labor to get into the future age, and now my eager anxiety to get out of it. And I laughed. I had made myself the most complicated and the most hopeless trap that ever a man devised. I laughed aloud. Going through the big palace, it seemed to me that the little people avoided me. It may have been my fancy, or it might have had something to do with my hammering at the gates of bronze. Yet I felt quite sure they were avoiding me. I was careful to show no anxiety and not to pursue them. And in the course of a day or two things were friendly again. I made what progress I could in the language. Either I missed some difficult point, or their language was surprisingly simple. It contained nothing but names of things and verbs. There seemed to be few, if any, abstract words. Their sentences were usually simple and out of 2 words, and I failed to make them understand any but the simplest ideas. I determined to put the thought of my time machine and this mystery of the bronze stars under the Sphinx in a corner of memory. In the end, growing knowledge would lead me back to them in a natural way, yet a certain feeling, you may understand, held me in a circle of a few miles round the point of my arrival. So far as I could see, all the world showed the same richness as the Thames Valley. From every hill I climbed, I saw splendid buildings, endlessly varied in material and form. Here and there water shone like silver, and beyond it the land rose into blue hills, and so faded into the calm of the sky. A peculiar thing, which soon attracted my attention, was the presence of certain circular wells. Several seemed to be of very great depth. One lay by the path up the hill, which I had followed during my first walk. Like the others, it was edged with bronze, curiously carved and protected by a little dome from the rain. Sitting by the side of these wells and peering down into the darkness, I could see no glimmer of water, nor could I start any reflection with a lighted match. But in all of them I heard a certain sound, a thud, 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 like the beating of some big engine, and I discovered, from the flame of my matches, that a steady current of air flowed down the wells. I threw a piece of paper into the throat of one. Instead of floating slowly down, it was at once drawn down swiftly out of sight. After a time, too, I connected these wells with tall towers standing here and there upon the slopes, for above them there was often just such a movement in the air as one sees on a hot day above a hot stretch of sand. Putting things together, I reached a strong suggestion of some system of ventilation. It seemed to be some sort of underground ventilation. I was at first inclined to think it had to do with ventilating the drainage, the pipes which carry away waste matter, but I was quite wrong. I must admit that I learned very little about drains, about the carriage of goods from place to place and things of this sort during my time in the future. In some storybooks about future worlds there is a great amount of information about such things. But imagine a man fresh from Central Africa will tell his people about London. What would he know about its drains, its telephones, telegraphs, about the inside workings of its postal system? Even if he knew, how would he make his friends understand? The distance between the mind of such a man and our minds is small. But the distance between my mind and the minds of those people, many thousands of years apart from me, was enormous. I knew of much which was unseen, which helped me to make me uncomfortable. But I knew nothing of the hidden workings of the system. In the matter of burial, for example, I could see the graves. Perhaps they were beyond the furthest point of my travels. Another thing puzzled me still more. There were no aged or weak. I could see that many of my ideas about these people were wrong. Let me tell some of my difficulties. The several big palaces I had seen were mere living places, great dining halls and sleeping apartments. I could find no machinery of any kind, yet these people were clothed in pleasant garments that must at times need renewal, and their shoes, though undecorated, were complicated pieces of metalwork. Somehow such things must be made, and the little people showed no sign of being able to make anything themselves. There were no shops, no workrooms. They spent all their time in playing gently in bathing in the river, in making love in a half playful fashion, in eating fruit and sleeping. I could not see how things were kept going. Then again, about the time machine. Something, I knew not what, had taken it into the hollow base of the White Sphinx. Why? I could not imagine why. Those waterless wells, too, those pillars giving out hot air. I felt I had missed something. I felt, how should I put it? Suppose you found a piece of writing with sentences here and there in an excellent plain English, and mixed in with others made of words, of letters even, absolutely unknown to you. Well, on the third day of my visit, that was how the world of 802,701 looked to me. Chapter 8. Weena. I made a friend of a sort. It happened as I was watching some of the little people bathing. One of them was seized with cramp and was being carried away down the stream. It will give you an idea, therefore, of the strange weakness in these creatures when I tell you that none made the slightest attempt to save the little thing which was drowning before their eyes. When I realized this, I hurriedly took off my clothes and went into the water at a point lower down. I caught the poor creature and drew her safe to land. I rubbed her lips, and I had the satisfaction of seeing she was all right before I left her. I had got to such a low idea of the little people that I did not expect any gratitude from her. In that, however, I was wrong. This happened in the morning. In the afternoon, I met my little woman as I was returning towards my sentry from a long walk, and she received me with cries of delight and presented me with a big garland of flowers, evidently made for me and me alone. The thing took my imagination. Very possibly I had been feeling sad. At any rate, I did my best to show that I was pleased by the gift. We were soon seated together in a little stone hut, engaged in conversation, chiefly of smiles. The creature's friendliness affected me exactly as a child's might have done. We passed each other flowers, and she kissed my hands. I did the same to hers. Then I tried to talk, and found that her name was Weena. That was the beginning of a queer friendship which lasted a week, and ended, as I will tell you. She was exactly like a child. She wanted to be with me always. She tried to follow me everywhere, and on my next journey out and about it went to my heart to tire her so and leave her at last, tired out and calling after me. But the problems of the world had to be mastered. I had not, I said to myself, come into the future to carry on a tiny love affair. Her distress when I left her was very great, but she was somehow a very great comfort. I thought it was a mere childish affection that made her hold to me, until it was too late. I did not clearly know what pain I had given her when I left her, nor until it was too late did I clearly understand what she was to me, for by merely seeming fond of me and showing in her weak, foolish way that she cared for me, the little doll of a creature gave my return to the neighborhood of the White Sphinx almost a feeling of coming home. I would watch her tiny figure of white and gold as soon as I came over the hills. It was from her, too, that I learned that fear had not yet left the world. She was fearless enough in the daylight, and she had the oddest confidence in me. Once, in a foolish moment, I gave her a threatening look, and she simply laughed at me. But she feared the dark shadows, black things. Darkness to her was the one thing dreadful. I discovered then, among other things, that these little people gathered into the great houses after dark, and slept in groups. To enter upon them without the light was to make them wild with fear. I never found out of those, or one sleeping alone within doors after dark. Yet I was still so stupid that I missed the lesson of that fear, and in spite of Venus' distress, I went on slipping away from those companies of the others. It troubled her greatly, but in the end her odd affection for me won, and for 5 of the nights of our friendship, including the last night of all, she slept with her head on my arm. But my story slips away from me as I speak of her. It happened on that night before I saved her from drowning. I was awakened about dawn. I had been restless, dreaming most disagreeably that I was drowned, and that sea creatures were touching my face with their soft cold feelers. I woke with a start, and with an odd fancy that some greyish animal had just rushed out of the room. I tried to get to the sleep again, but I felt restless and uncomfortable. It was that dim grey hour when things are just creeping out of darkness, when everything is colourless and clear-cut and yet unreal. I got up and went down into the great hall, and so out upon the stones in front of the palace, I thought that, as I had woken up, I would see the sunrise. The moon was setting, and the dying moonlight and the first pale light of dawn were mixed in a ghostly half-light. The bushes were inky black, the ground a dull grey, the sky colourless and cheerless, and up the hill I thought I could see ghosts. 3 times, as I looked at the slope, I saw white figures. Twice I fancied I saw a white ape-like creature running rather quickly up the hill. When once near the ruins, I saw 2 of them carrying some dark body. They moved hastily. I did not see what happened to them. It seemed that they disappeared among the bushes. The dawn was still indistinct. I doubted my eyes. As the eastern sky grew brighter and the light of the day came on, I looked carefully, but I saw no sign of my white figures. They were mere creatures of the half-light. They must have been ghosts, I said. I was thinking of these figures all the morning, until Vina drove them out of my head. I associate them in some indefinite way with the white animal I had seen in my first search for the time machine. Vina was a pleasant subject for thought. I think I have said how much hotter the weather of this golden age was than our own. I cannot explain this. It may be that the sun was hotter, or the earth was nearer the sun. It is usual to believe that the sun will go on cooling steadily in the future, but people forget that the planets must in the end fall back one by one into the parent body. As they do so, the sun will blaze with renewed energy. It may be that some planets nearer to the sun than our Earth had suffered this fate. Whatever the reason, the fact remains that the sun was very much hotter than we know it. Well, one very hot morning, my fourth, I think, I was seeking shelter from the heat in a gigantic ruin near the great house where I slept and fed. Climbing among these heaps of stones, I found a narrow passage whose end and side windows were blocked. I entered it, feeling my way, for the change from light to blackness made spots of color swim before me. Suddenly, I stopped. A pair of eyes was watching me out of the darkness. The old inborn dread of wild beasts came upon me. I was afraid to turn. Then I thought of the absolute security in which men appear to be living, and then I remembered that strange terror of the dark. Overcoming my fear, I advanced a step and spoke. I will admit that my voice was hard and ill-controlled. I put out my hand and touched something soft. At once, the eyes jumped sideways, and something white ran past me. I turned with my heart in my mouth and saw a queer little ape-like figure. Its head held down in a peculiar manner, running across the sunlit space behind me. It ran against a block of stone, fell, and in a moment was hidden in a black shadow beneath another pile of ruins. My idea of it is, of course, imperfect, but I know it was a dull white and had strange large greyish-red eyes. Also that there was light yellow hair on its head and down its back. But, as I say, it went too fast for me to see distinctly. I cannot even say whether it ran on 4 feet or only with its 4 arms held very low. After an instant's pause, I followed into the second heap of ruins. I could not find it at first, but after a time in the darkness, I came upon one of those round well-like openings of which I have told you, half closed by a fallen pillar. A sudden thought came to me. Could this thing have disappeared down the well? I lit a match, and looking down, I saw a small, white moving creature with large, bright eyes which gazed at me steadily as it retreated. It filled me with disgust. It was so like a human spider. It was climbing down the well, and now I saw for the first time a number of metal rests for the feet or hands, forming a kind of ladder. Then the light burned my fingers and fell out of my hand, going out as it dropped. When I had lit another match, the creature had disappeared. I do not know how long I sat gazing down that well. It was some time before I could persuade myself that the thing which I had seen was human. But gradually the truth dawned on me. Men had not remained one, but had changed and become 2 different animals. My graceful children of the upper world were not the only descendants of man as he was in our time. This pale, horrible thing which lived in darkness was also our descendant. I thought of the pillars and of my idea of an underground ventilation. I began to suspect their true meaning. And what, and I wondered, was this creature doing in the system of life as I had thought it out? How was it related to the lazy calm of the beautiful upper-worlders? And what was hidden down there at the foot of that well? I sat upon the edge of the well, telling myself that there was nothing to fear. I must go down there to find the answer to my difficulties. Yet I was absolutely afraid to go. As I hesitated, 2 of the beautiful upper-world people came running in their play across the daylight into the shadow. The male pursued the female, throwing flowers at her as he ran. They seemed distressed to find me, my arm against the overturned pillar, gazing down the well. It seemed to be considered bad manners to notice these wells. When I pointed to this one and tried to ask a question about it in their language, they were even more distressed and turned away. But they were interested in my matches, and I struck some to amuse them. I asked them again about the well, and again I failed. So I left them, meaning to go back to Vina and see what I could get from her. My guesses and ideas were slipping and sliding to a new shape. I had now some idea of the meaning of these wells, of the ventilating towers, of the mystery of the ghosts. I knew the meaning of the bronze gates and the fate of the time machine. Then, very dimly, there came a suggestion as to the question how these little people lived, how their clothes and food and other needs were supplied. This second kind of man lived underground. This was shown by the pale look common in most animals that live largely in the dark. the white fish of the Kentucky caves, for example. It was shown by those large eyes which are common in night animals such as the cats. And last of all, that evident confusion in the sunshine, that hasty flight towards dark shadow, and that peculiar way of holding the head while in the light. All were signs of an animal which lives in darkness. Beneath my feet, then, the earth must be tunneled enormously, and these tunnelings were the home of the new race, the presence of ventilating chimneys and wells along the hill slopes. Everywhere, in fact, except along the river valley, showed how widespread this tunneling was. In this underworld, such work as was necessary to the comfort of the daylight race was done. It seemed clear to me that the gradual widening of the present social difference between the capitalist and the laborer was the key to the whole position. There is even now a tendency to use underground space, to use it for the less ornamental purposes of civilization. There is the underground railway in London. There are underground workrooms and restaurants, and they increase and multiply. Clearly, I thought, this tendency had increased till industry had gradually lost its right to live under the sky. It had gone deeper and deeper into larger and even larger underground facilities, spending a still increasing amount of its time there, till, in the end, even now, does not an East End worker in London live in such conditions that he is practically cut off from the natural surface of the earth. On the other side, there is the tendency of the rich to keep themselves more and more separate from the poor. For this reason, large parts of the surface of the earth are kept close for their use. Half the prettier country around London is shut in against all outsiders. This makes the exchange between class and more difficult. At present there is some intermarriage, some marrying between rich and poor, which delays the division of man into two separate animals. But in the end this happened. Man divided. Above ground there were the apes, pursuing pleasure and comfort and beauty. Below ground there were the workers, becoming continually more and more used to the conditions of their labor, and as happy in their way as the upper world people were in their way. This double civilization had long ago reached its highest point and was now far fallen into decay. The too perfect security of the upper worlders had led to a general decrease in size, strength, and intelligence. That I could see clearly enough already. What had happened to the undergrounders I did not yet suspect, but from what I had seen of the Morlocks, that was the name by which these creatures were called, I could imagine that the change was even far greater than among the Eloi, the beautiful race that I already knew. Then came troublesome doubts. Why had the Morlocks taken my time machine? For I felt sure it was they who had taken it. Why, if the Eloi were masters, could they not get the machine back for me? And why were they so terribly afraid of the dog? I questioned Mina about this underworld, but here again I was disappointed. At first she could not understand my questions, and later she refused to answer them. She behaved as if the subject was unbearable, and when I pressed her, she burst into tears. They were the only tears, except my own, I ever saw in that golden age. When I saw them, I ceased to trouble about the Morlocks, and was only concerned in drying the tears from Venus' eyes. Very soon she was smiling and clapping her hands, while I solemnly burned a match. Chapter 9. In the Underworld. It was 2 days before I could follow up my new discovery. I felt a peculiar dislike of those pale bodies. They were just the grey color of the dead things no one sees preserved in spirit in the museum, and they were horribly cold to the touch. Probably my dislike was largely due to the influence of the Eloi, whose disgust of the Morlocks I now began to understand. The next night I did not sleep well. I was filled with doubt. Once or twice I had a feeling of fear for which I could find no definite reason. I remember creeping noiselessly into the great hall where the little people were sleeping in the moonlight. That night Weena was among them, and feeling safer in their presence. In the course of a few days the moon must pass through its last quarter, and the nights grow dark. Then the appearances of these unpleasant creatures from below might be more numerous. I felt sure that the time machine could only be regained by boldly going into these mysterious underground places. Yet I could not face the mystery. If only I had a companion, it would be different. But I was so horribly alone, and even to climb down into the darkness of the well filled me with horror. I don't know if you will understand my feeling, but I never felt quite safe at my back. A feeling of restlessness drew me farther and farther abroad in my walks. One day I went to the south westward towards the rising country which is now called Combe Wood. I observed far off, in the direction of 19th century Banstead, a vast green building, different in character from any I had seen. It was larger than the largest of the places or ruins I knew. At the front had a Chinese look. It had a smooth, pale green surface like that of certain Chinese pots. The difference in appearance suggested some difference in use, and I wanted to go on and learn more. But the day was growing late, so I decided to hold over the adventure for tomorrow, and I returned to the welcome and love of little Weena. On the next morning, I saw clearly enough that my interest in the Chinese Green Palace was really a piece of self-deception, to enable me to avoid for one more day an experience which I dreaded. I decided to make the descent without further waste of time, and started out in the early morning. Little Weena ran with me. She danced beside me to the well, but when she saw me bend over the mouth and looked downward, she seemed strangely distressed. "Goodbye, little Weena," I said, kissing her. Then putting her down, I began to feel the inside of the well for the climbing hooks. At first, Weena watched me in amazement. Then she gave a cry, and running to me, she began to pull at me with her little hands. I think her opposition gave me courage to go on. I shook her off, perhaps a little roughly, and in another moment I was in the throat of the well. I saw her anxious face above me and smiled to show that I was all right. Then I had to look down at the hooks to which I was holding. I had to climb down perhaps 200 yards. There were metal bars standing out from the sides of the well. These were made for the needs of a creature much smaller and lighter than myself. So I was quickly tired by the descent. One of the bars bent suddenly under my weight and almost swung me off into the blackness beneath. For a moment I hung by one hand, and after that experience I did not dare to rest again. Though my arms and back were soon very painful, I went on climbing down the steep descent with as a quick emotion as possible. Looking upward, I saw the opening as a small blue circle in which a star was visible, while little Venus' head showed as a round black point on the edge. The thudding sound of a machine below grew louder and louder. Everything except that little circle above me was black darkness. and when I looked up again, Weena had disappeared. I was in great pain and discomfort. I had some thought of trying to go up the well again and leave the underworld alone. But even while I turned this over in my mind, I continued to descend. At last, I saw dimly coming up, a foot to the right of me, a narrow hole in the wall. Swinging myself in, I found it was the opening of a horizontal tunnel in which I could lie down and rest. I needed a rest. My arms were stiff and painful, and I was trembling with the fear of a fall. Besides this, the unbroken darkness had had a distressing effect upon my eyes. The air was full of the throb and hum of machinery pumping air down. I do not know how long I lay. I was roused by a soft hand touching my face. Starting up in the darkness, I seized my matches and hastily struck one. I saw 3 white creatures, very like the one I had seen above ground in the ruin, hastily retreating before the light. Because they lived in what appeared to me complete darkness, their eyes were very large and sensitive, just as are the eyes of the deep-sea fishes, and they reflected the light in the same way. I have no doubt they could see me quite well in that darkness, and they did not seem to have any fear of me apart from the light. But so soon as I struck a match in order to see them, they fled wildly away, disappearing into dark pipes and tunnels, from which their eyes shone out at me in the strangest fashion. I tried to call to them, but their language was different from that of the overworld people. I felt my way along the tunnel. The noise of machinery grew louder. Soon the walls fell away from me, and I came to a large open space, and, striking another match, saw that I had entered a vast cave, which stretched into utter darkness beyond the range of my lights. The view I had of it was as much as one could see in the burning of a match. Great shapes like big machines rose out of the darkness and cast gigantic black shadows in which dim, ghost-like Morlocks sheltered from the light. The place was very hot and airless, and the faint smell of fresh blood was in the air. Some way down the central passage was a little table of white metal, laid with what seemed a meal. The Morlocks, at any rate, were meat-eaters. Even at the time, I remember wondering what large animal I could have supplied the red leg of meat which I saw. It was all very indistinct. The heavy smell, the big unmeaning shapes, the dim figures hiding in the shadows and only waiting for the darkness to come at me again. Then the match burned down and fell, a red spot in the blackness. I have since thought how badly prepared I was for such an experience. When I started with the time machine, I had the idea that the men of the future will certainly be far ahead of ourselves in all their things. I had come without weapons, without medicine, without anything to smoke, even without enough matches. If only I had thought of a camera! I could have taken a photograph on the underworld in a second and examined it later. But, as it was, I stood there with only the weapons and the powers which nature had given me: hands, feet, and teeth. These, and 4 safety matches that still remained to me. I was afraid to push my way in among all this machinery in the dark, and I discovered that my store of matches had run low. I never thought until that moment that there was any need to be careful of them. I had wasted almost half the box in astonishing the upperworlders. Now I had 4 left, and while I stood in the dark, a hand touched mine, Cold fingers came feeling over my face, and I noticed a peculiar, unpleasant smell. I fancied I heard the breathing of a crowd of those dreadful little creatures about me. I felt the box of matches in my hand being gently pulled away, and other hands behind me picking at my clothing. The feeling of these unseen creatures examining me was very unpleasant. I shouted at them as loudly as I could. They started away, and then I could feel them coming back again. They touched me more boldly, whispering odd sounds to each other. I trembled. Then I shouted again. This time they were not so seriously alarmed, and they made a queer laughing noise as they came back at me. I will confess I was horribly frightened. I decided to strike another match and escape under the protection of its light. I did so and used it to light a piece of paper from my pocket. While I retreated to the narrow tunnel, but I had scarcely entered this when my light was blown out, and in the blackness I could hear the Morlocks whispering like wind among leaves, and their little feet like rain as they hurried after me. In a moment I was seized by several hands, and there was no mistaking that they were trying to pull me back. I struck another light and waved it in their faces. You can scarce imagine how horrible they looked, those pale, chinless faces and great lidless pinkish grey eyes. As they gazed in their blindness and fear, but I did not stay to look. I retreated again, and when my second match had ended, I struck my third. It had almost burned through when I reached the opening into the well. I felt sideways for the bars. As I did so, my feet were seized from behind, and I was pulled backward. I lit my last match, and it went out at once. But I had my hand on the climbing bars now. I kicked and freed myself from the hands of the Morlocks, and was speedily climbing up. While they stayed gazing up at me, all but one little creature who followed me for some way and nearly got my boot as a prize. That climb seemed endless to me. With the last 20 or 30 feet of it, a deadly sickness came upon me. I had the greatest difficulty in keeping my hold. The last few yards was a frightful struggle against this faintness. Several times my head swam, and I felt as if I was falling. At last I got over the well mouth somehow, and came out of the ruin into the blinding sunlight. I fell upon my face. Even the soil smelled sweet and clean. Then I remembered Vina kissing my hands and ears, and the voices of others among the loi. Then, for a time, I was senseless. Now I seem to be in a worse state than before. Until now I thought that my only difficulty in getting back the time machine was the childish simplicity of the little people and some unknown force. I thought that if only I could understand that unknown force, I could overcome it. But there was something quite new in the Morlocks, something inhuman and evil. I hated them. Until now I felt like only a man who has fallen into a trap. Now I felt like a beast in a trap whose enemy would come upon him soon. That enemy which I feared was the new moon. Vina had put this idea about the new moon into my head by some remarks about the dark nights. It was not now very difficult to guess what the coming dark nights might mean. The moon was decreasing. Each night there was a longer time of darkness, and I now understood the reason of the fear of the little upper-world people for the dark. I wondered what evil things the Morlocks did under the new moon. The upper-world people might once have been favored nobles, and the Morlocks their mechanical servants, but that had long since passed away. The two peoples had arrived at an altogether new relationship. The alloy had decayed to a mere beautiful uselessness. They were still allowed to possess the earth because the Morlocks had lived underground for so long that they found the earth's surface unbearable. The Morlocks made their garments and supplied their other needs, perhaps because they were accustomed to serve. Just as a horse goes on pulling a cart when there is no driver. But clearly the old order had changed. The fate of the delicate little people was fast approaching. Ages ago, thousands of generations ago, man had driven his brother man out of the east and the sunshine. And now that brother was coming back, changed. Already the alloy had begun to learn one lesson anew. They were again learning fear. And suddenly there came into my head the memory of the meat I had seen in the other world. It seemed odd how it floated into my mind. I tried to remember the shape of it. I had a feeling that I had seen it before, but I could not tell what it was at the time. Still, however helpless the little people were in the presence of their mysterious fear, I was different. I came out of this age of ours, when fear does not make one helpless, and mystery has lost its terrors. I at least will defend myself. Without further delay, I determined to make myself arms and a safe place where I might sleep. I felt I could never sleep again until my bed was secure from the Morlocks. I shook with horror to think how they must already have examined me. Chapter 10. Night in the Forest. I wandered during the afternoon along the valley of the Thames, but found nothing suitable as a safe place for sleeping. All the buildings and trees could easily be climbed by the Morlocks. Then the tall towers of the Green Palace and its polished walls came back to my memory. In the evening, taking Mina like a child upon my shoulder, I went up the hills towards the southwest. I thought that the distance was about 7 or 8 miles, but it was nearly nearer 18. I first saw the place on a rainy afternoon when distances seem much shorter than they are. Now there was a nail in my shoe and my foot was sore and painful. I walked with difficulty. So it was already long past sunset when I came inside of the palace, standing up black against the pale yellow of the sky. Weena was hugely delighted when I began to carry her, but after a time she decided me to let her down, and ran along by the side of me, occasionally going off to pick flowers to put in my pockets. My pockets always puzzled Weena, but at the last she had decided that they were an unusual kind of container for flowers. At least she used them for that purpose. And that reminds me, in changing my coat I found the time traveler paused, put his hand into his pocket and silently placed 2 dead flowers, not unlike very large white lilies, upon the little table. Then he went on with his story. As the quiet of evening crept over the world, and we walked over the hill towards Wimbledon, Weena grew tired and wanted to return to the House of Stone, but I pointed out the distant towers of the Green Palace to her, and made her understand that we were seeking a safe place there from her fear. You know that great silence that comes upon things before the dark? Even the wind stops in the trees. To me, there is always an air of expectation about that evening stillness. The sky was clear, distant, and empty save for a few long bars of cloud far down in the sunset. In that darkening calm, my senses seemed sharpened. I fancied I could even feel the hollowness of the ground beneath my feet. Could, indeed, almost see through it, the Morlocks in their anthill, going here and there and waiting for the dark. I felt that they looked upon me as their enemy, that there was war between me and them. Why had they taken my time machine? So we went on the quiet, and the half-light deepened into night. The clear blue of the distance faded, and one star after another came out. The ground grew dim and the trees black. Venus' fears and her weariness grew upon her. I took her in my arms and talked to her. Then, as the darkness grew deeper, she put her arms around my neck and, closing her eyes, tightly pressed her face against my shoulder. So we went down a long slope into a valley, and there, in the dimness, I almost walked into a little river. I crossed it and went up the opposite side of the valley, past a number of sleeping houses, and by a statue which had no head. So far I had seen nothing of the Morlocks, but it was yet early in the night, and the darker hours before the old moon rose were still to come. From the top of the next hill I saw a thick forest or woods spreading wide and black before me. I could see no end to it, either to the right or the left. I felt tired. My feet were very sore. I carefully lowered Vina from my shoulder as I stopped and sat down upon the grass. I could no longer see the green palace, and I was in doubt of my direction. I looked into the thickness of the wood and thought of what it might hide. Under those thick branches one would be out of sight of the stars. I was very tired, too, after the excitements of the day. So I decided that I would pass the night upon the open hill. Vina, I was glad to find, was asleep. I carefully wrapped her in my coat and sat down beside her to wait for the moonrise. The hillside was quiet and deserted, but from the black of the wood there came now and then a movement of living things. Above me shone the stars, for the night was very clear. I felt a certain sense of friendly comfort in their light. In these thousands of years all the old groupings of stars had gone. The stars were now in unfamiliar arrangements, but the Milky Way, the white band across the sky, was still the same line of stardust as of old. Looking at these stars suddenly made my own troubles seem very small. I thought of their vast distance and their slow passing out of the unknown past into the unknown future. I thought of the great circle drawn by the North Pole of the earth. Only 40 times had the silent revolution occurred during all the years which I had crossed. During these few revolutions, all the activity, all the nations, languages, literatures, hopes, even the mere memory of man as I knew him, had been swept out of existence. Instead of them, there were these little creatures who had forgotten their noble past, and the white things of which I went in terror. Then I thought of the great fear that was between the two races of men. For the first time came the clear knowledge of what the meat I had seen might be. Yet it was too horrible. I looked at little Vina sleeping beside me, her face white and star-like under the stars, and quickly dismissed the thought from my mind. Through that long night I held my mind off the Morlocks as well as I could. I spent the hours of night studying the stars. The sky kept very clear, except for a misty cloud or so. No doubt I slept at times. Then at last there came a faintness in the eastward sky, like the reflection of some colorless fire, and the old moon rose, thin and white. And close behind and overtaking it and overflowing it, the dawn came, pale at first and then growing pink and warm. No Morlocks had approached us. Indeed, I had seen none upon the hill that night, and in the confidence of renewed day, it almost seemed to me that my fear had been unreasonable. I stood up and found my foot swollen and painful. So I sat down again, took off my shoes, and threw them away. I awakened Vina, and we went down into the wood, now green and pleasant instead of black and forbidding. We found some fruit to eat for breakfast. We soon met others of the little people laughing and dancing in the sunlight as though there was no such thing in nature as the night. And then I thought once more of the meat that I had seen. I felt assured now of what it was, and from the bottom of my heart, I pitied this last feeble stream from the great flood of humanity. Clearly, at some time the long ago of human decay, the Morlocks' food had run short. Possibly they had lived on rats and such like things. Even now, man is far less delicate in choosing his food than he was, far less than any monkey. His feeling against human flesh is not deep-seated in his mind. And so these inhuman sons of men. I try to look at the thing in a scientific spirit. Why should I trouble myself? These alloy were mere fatted cattle, which the ant-like Morlocks preserved and used as food, as we use cattle and sheep. And there was Vina dancing at my side. Then I tried to regard it as a punishment of human selfishness. They had lived at ease upon their fellow men, and now those fellow men were living upon them. I tried to make myself feel scorn for their miserable nobility in decay, but I could not. However great the decay of their intelligence, the alloy had kept so much of the human form that I felt sorry for them, and felt myself a sharer in their shame. I had at the time no clear plans. My first was to secure some safe place of hiding, and to make myself such arms of metal or stone as I could. That necessity was immediate. In the next place, I hoped to get some means of lighting a fire, so that I should have the weapon which I knew would be most efficient against these Morlocks. Then I wanted to arrange some means of breaking open the doors of bronze under the White Sphinx. I had an idea that if I could enter those doors and carry a light before me, I would discover the time machine and escape. I could not imagine the Morlocks were strong enough to move so far away. I had resolved to bring Vina with me to our own time. Turning such plans over in my mind, I went on our way towards the building which my fancy had chosen as our home.